pole dancing monkey warriors, real life drop bears, and nope, all this can be yours in Black Myth Wukong by Game Science for PC and PlayStation. Out probably right now as this review goes live. While my reviewer embargo is free to post anything with no restrictions other than later story and level bits, I'll keep it to a couple bosses, of which there are many, and some locations. And yes, that means I can say anything. I wouldn't sign NDAs with restrictions that you may see flitting around the net. But that's why this is KARAK. I run ACG and my reviews aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. Let's do it. Subscribe for more reviews and previews and check out the new podcast channel in the description. We're going to do some behind the scenes for this game on Friday. Comment. Maybe get a chance to win the game. We'll give a couple copies out to commenters. Black Myth Wukong opens in a majestic moment of pure insanity, with you riding in on the clouds like a simian silver surfer and challenging the gods. But then you pretty much are given the ogre's choice. Win the fight and still lose, or lose the fight and still lose. Then you get in a short fight with long weapons, almost get smashed through a mountain, and then transform into a bird and try to fly away before getting the ever-living crap tasered out of you. That sets the stage perfectly for a third-person action game, a little bit Stellar Blade, a little DMC, a little bit Dark Souls and Elden Ring, but a whole lot its own thing. First up, let's talk about the presentation. Regardless of the settings you put Black Myth on, it's one of the best looking games you're probably going to play in a long time. But almost everything in Black Myth is aimed at delivering gorgeous graphics with a heady stance on displaying prodigious amounts of large scenic locations and even larger monsters. It may not have the sheer size in its enemies like Azure's Wrath and in the past God of War games, maybe, but it ups it in just pure grandeur. I mean, the first battle's against Celestials on a cloud. Bosses primp and preen before they careen across the level and moves almost ripped from Kung Fu Panda. Others cock their heads back and forth with a hand to their ear as you move around trying to listen. Enemies sit around fires discussing this scary monkey, and then they're startled by your presence, whip out swords, and separate to give space. The game just keeps delivering and delivering. Casting a particular spell has you pulling your hair out and casting it to the ground, spawning a ton of suicide monkey copies bent on ruining whatever enemies nearby. Hidden level sections are those moments of incredible discovery as you shimmy through a gap and find a whole new cave complex to explore. Many games have excellent secrets or amazing looking locations. Black Myth is one where the two are seamlessly connected almost all the time, where meditating at a shrine gets you a level up, but also a vast afield look at a wasted village that has you consistently trying to find a way to get there. Aside from the location design, if there's one thing Black Myth has going for it, it's character. Your mentor is a dude who shows up and looks like he belongs in one of those videos of a homeless person getting their first demusking in 8 years. A drunken monkey, tipsy and sitting against a cave wall, sells a ton of potions. A giant frog who somehow found a shirt that fits him in a stagnant pool of water. And of course has a frog leg attack that's both hilarious looking and as potent as you would assume a giant frog leg attack would be. But it's also the animations of the monkey climbing to the top of the staff, low attacks whisking below him like so many useless cat pines, and then whipping end over end, the staff stretching out like an anime to smash into some freaky no-headed looking monstrosity. Animations are also excellent, jumps that bring you back to old martial arts movies, knees tucked underneath them as they fly through the air, parkour simians with an eye on not tearing out the crotch of their pants with a superhero one-knee landing. The game is just a glorious bit of world building with characters to match and a profoundly different slant on design than we see very often. When it comes to absolute performance, I asked for the PC version for review. I have an AMD 7800X3D, 64 gigs RAM, and a 4090 with everything maxed out. Not the cinematic level, of course, ray tracing on at 4K or as close as you can get it with the way this game actually renders. It just couldn't always do it. It was up there near native resolution, but setting it lower just nets you a huge amount of frame rate back, something you should probably look at. This is especially true in later levels, which I'll try to discuss a bit more in depth during Friday's podcast, but not on this because it's a bit of a spoiler. Another thing that can come up and is noticeable is micro stutter that can occur at different times. It definitely seems worse when it's on the ray tracing high level. This thing is a hog. It is a beast, and you're going to find yourself definitely setting it down unless you have a 4090 or a really good CPU. It was hitting the system harder than almost any game I can remember. The game has an enormous amount of settings, from view distance, anti-aliasing, post effects, shadows, textures, visual effects, hair, vegetation, global illumination, reflection quality, as well as, of course, DLSS, Intel upscaling, TSR, and FSR, with frame generation for DLSS and FSR included. DLSS offered the best picture with the least amount of shimmering and broken edges, where Intel's was much sharper than it felt like it needed to be. TSR was generally acceptable. However, while testing, I did run afoul of FSR's issue with persistent smudge, an almost greasy, messy-looking effect, especially prominent when swinging the staff, as the game shows all manner of blur and movement effects on the weapons, and FSR just did not look good with almost any setting. It could be toned down a bit with a setting or two, but it's just not pretty. The devs state they have another patch planned for shoring up FSR. At least one patch has been out, but it hasn't unfortunately cleaned it up. Your biggest offenders for frame rate outside of resolution are solidly ray tracing at high or medium in a setting called generically visual effects, which also had a 10 to 15 FPS hit depending on the level and location. When it comes to frame gen, it works on the upscalers that support it, and that's a godsend because the way the game works and its dodge mechanics, which I'll discuss in the gameplay section, even with frame gen's notoriously higher input lag, I was able to play it without issues and defeat all of the bosses that I faced. When it comes to Unreal Engine stutter, it seems to compile most shaders at the starting. I did have a couple freezes though on some levels for a second or two, and some of those didn't freeze at all when I went to a new level or transferred back. It's just one of those things that can pop up. Loading into new levels didn't cause it to happen, nor did moving around or fast traveling. The devs again did state another patch was coming. Ray tracing at the low setting still looks really good and does net you a good number of FPS back, so you'll also want to look at that. And there are definitely some textures in the game that, depending on exactly where you are or what you're doing, you can see up close, and they're not exactly pretty. It is a bit more of a sour state of affairs than I was hoping for from an initial performance. But in many places, man, that is lifted up by animation, character work, and just level design. Let's talk about the audio for a bit.
This humble one's name is Guangmo. Should my demise come by your hands, please pass this message to my master. Searching for deity, mortals do aspire. Craving immortality, Yao Guais surely will conspire! But what I don't understand is... you bastards killing my kind!
When it comes to the sound, Black Myth has excellent assorted environmental sounds for all the locations, doing a really good job transitioning the player from desert dry windswept areas and the harsh hum of that desert to the crunch and snow and hush that a landscape ensconced in winter creates. Each location has small notes that accompany it: the crackle of leaves under your hand-like feet, the burble of a creek that flows up as you pass over a hill and encounter a samurai wolf-looking dude decked out in a kimono and a bad attitude. But it's truly the combat sounds that work very well. The depth and 3D audio here parsed out well enough that it can help you ascertain when an enemy behind you is attacking is very useful, even if he doesn't grunt, snarl, or roar each time he does so anyway. Or when you transform into a headbutting spirit and crack down hacksaw Jim Duggan style on an unsuspecting bandit chief, that hit sound is awesome. However, and this won't bother everybody, because your main weapon is a staff and a number of hits are unpowered by mystical energy until you add focus, slamming a piece of wood into an enemy's body doles out a consistently bland thunk-thunk sound. And when you're under some giant's legs doing a staff flourish and it just keeps thunking along, it misses the mark a bit. It almost seems a bit too gamified, a bit too hit sounding versus something that might resonate more and with more diversity in the sound design, especially as enemies, bosses, items, special hits all have their own callouts. The major monkey staff would have audibly hit a bit harder with more variation. And it's a small issue that won't be noticed by many people, but I picked up on it. Let's talk about the music, because picking up on this and understanding where they're coming from and just how different this music is sort of vital in your enjoyment of it. Native instruments, native vocals, native everything, a mix of all kinds of music. There isn't really a thing here that feels like classical music you might expect in a Dark Souls or the angsty metal in a DMC. Though the battle music can get pumping away in the background during fights, it's also a bit subdued. When exploring, you might notice just the sound of a guitar or some chimes and very little else. When a character shows up and serenades you with hints and clues about the future merged with heroic actions you've taken in the past, it takes a different tact, and I liked it. When it comes to the voice, it's not the gruff expectations that we've had for the usual main characters, nor the high-winded helium-sucking squawk of go-get-em momentum that many JRPGs have. Instead, for a brief moment, the main monkey man is a weirdly high-pitched, often hilariously whiny-sounding protagonist, which is a damn breath of fresh air for about 3 minutes, because the aforementioned mountain maiming, transforming into a bird, getting destroyed bit, you play as a generally silent descendant of them after that. It's too bad, too, because movements, leaps, perfect dodges all elicit the assorted martial arts kips and barks you'd expect. I would have loved to heard more of the main character's voice. But the same excellent voice works can be said for other enemies as well. Gruff, ratkin-looking men slyly scraping their way through voice lines, giant bosses sliced into submission and then begging for mercy, and a suitably huge assortment of honorable, dishonorable, and downright hilarious characters throughout. I also played roughly half the game in both languages. Now first, the age-old debate of I can hear the emotion in a language I don't understand being more or less useful than I can hear the emotion in a language I do understand is as old as the first time a dub's ever been done. The voice acting is crazy good in Chinese, or maybe it is. I don't understand Chinese, but I sat through half of the game in that, and it was good. If you're a person who can sit through languages you can't understand and like to read subs, it seems like you're going to be rewarded. If you're a person who doesn't, it also seems like you're going to be rewarded. Both sides are equally rewarded. That's a lot of rewarding. And speaking of rewards, let's talk about gameplay and how that rewards you for jumping into the game. Now, first, a bit about the story. You probably heard it. This is a bit of a retelling or somewhat based on the Journey to the West, classic literature, which means a good number of people won't have any clue what that means. And those who do finish the game and may think, what the hell? In many ways, it's like Sons of Anarchy was Hamlet, or Brother, Where Art Thou was loosely based on the Odyssey. It's sections and bits of Journey to the West through their own lens. That doesn't mean the game doesn't give you information. It does, and a great deal of it. It's just that the granularity may not always be on the same level of other games. In many ways, this is one of the closest places where Black Myth overlaps with, say, Elden Ring, and the way information is given there. In the handling of lore, journal entries and cutscenes do the general lifting, with the rest of the experience itself within the actual combat and different voiceovers. It's about reading the riddle to get a door open, then listening to a song and realizing, you know what? That sounds like a clue. Black is like many third-person action games. That means it's a mixture of timing and expectations across experience learned through battles prior. Movement, weak attacks, strong attacks, the same things all apply here, and understanding when to use them. Each level has you working through it, finding enemies, secrets, and pathways to get to new places. It's just that Black Myth there, or at least here, has more semi-level bosses than a lot of other games. But don't mistake it for a boss rush game, because the normal enemies in the levels and collectibles are how you actually take out the bosses. Without taking those guys down and gathering all of that, which is the money in Wukong, you'll have to collect items for your mixtures and reagents, mushrooms, mandrakes, ferns, flowers, and more to mix and match for the later enemies anyway. It makes sense to engage in the actual normal enemies you see at any one place, because pretty much everything is usable in some way. And you find out the importance of that kind of exploration when you realize that in the stores, a lot of items have a particular amount of them that you can buy, and once you unlock the potion maker, it's about you actually doing so. It's about exploring those locations, trying to take out a semi-boss, and then possibly running to get supplies or to explore more to get additional items, to get more potions, so that you can go on to the later levels. And of course, those later bosses. Killing some of those characters in the levels gives you their ability to resurrect them for a moment as a spirit and use them in battle. Ninja wolves spinning through the air, throwing ninja stars, crossbow freaks that'll surely go down in gaming as wily-ass SOBs, fiery dogs. The best part is that spells and transformations are not some extra part of the combat. They're solidly a part of the pyramid of gameplay and upgrades. Understanding their usefulness with upgrading your staff or shaving off just a couple bucks to buy an upgrade makes every part of it feel intrinsically tied to the other. I'm sure some Iron Man players are going to go and try to do a no transformation run or no power run, but since each hit increases your focus, and focus is spent not only on power moves but chaining other attacks to longer combos, ignoring one element won't really reward you with much. You could just say it like this: for the most part, Black Myth is one of the better balanced when it comes to the different combat elements that we've seen in a game of this type. It also does a good job helping new players along. Black Myth takes its time to give the players just a moment to come to grips with a bit of everything the farther you progress. The first enemies are somewhat pushovers, removing that initial difficulty that can sometimes crop up in Dark Souls games when some random zombie that can't get over a tree root suddenly hits you and smites you. That's really not how Black Myth plays out. There's no block in the game either. Instead, it's dodge, dodge, more dodge, but you do have a wicked looking staff spin that can shirk off ranged and up close attacks, but eats through stamina like fucking Pac-Man. Dodge is the monkey shines here though. Perfect one, slow down time for a tick and leave a copy of yourself in your wake so that you can see that you've done it. But that doesn't mean stealth is ignored. One of the first spells you get is the ability to go into a ghost mode, leaving a decoy behind you as you move around unimpeded for just a bit, which is vital if you're wanting to get by some enemies or figure out a way around a corner without taking on 3 ogres, 3 archers, and 2 shield-carrying wolfmen who apparently spend a lot of time with Dog the Bounty Hunter because they can sniff you out with ease. Now, each boss is a new series of moves to remember, of openings to time. Imagine playing speed chess, but each game was not only against a new opponent, but also a switch from chess to checkers, and then Othello, and then Tower Rummy, and so on. All of them may have pieces, a board, strategies like offense, timing, patience, and aggressiveness, and they're shared between them, but each time the rules change. And other than a few stinkers, most of the bosses are really good. For example, that giant amphibian I talked about, whose parents were apparently a massive frog and a lightning bug, poisoned you with his tongue and then belches globes of lightning at you because why not? He's deep in a recessed pool, while higher up in the mountains is a somewhat abandoned field and a patrolling war dog. And to choose between those two, or move between them, means working through the other characters in the level. Characters like the Archer, rapid-fire sons of bitches with the ability to deal out wooden sticks like oversized sharpened chopstick factories. Enthusiastically stabby would be a good descriptor for them. Sure, they don't take many hits to take down, but getting to them is a gauntlet of dodges, shadow walks, and leaps. And if there are 4, perched out like pissy projectile shooting crows cawing away at you and warning to their friends, who happens to be a 2-headed rat troll that can also breathe fire, you have to understand to use all the elements you have. I do, however, wish the AI for the normal enemies was a bit better. Game AI has been going to school for 30 years and really hasn't got past freshman courses when it comes to land traversal, and you do see that here from time to time. The world's organic use of structure, rock, logs, earth, and verticality in all ways means that Puffington Snorkel Pants, the lizard-looking magic user, might get stuck on a rock the size of your foot. On the other hand, I would just say, take advantage of that. Between fighting and exploring and great outdooring, you're going to be leaping into your character page and going to alter yourself, to level up, craft, and upgrade items, buy and sell to the store, or level up the spirits that you've collected to fight with you. Now, First Black Myth's based on a typical set of attributes that we've seen in a couple other games. While many times those stats overlay with everything, where one change can adjust the speed of a dodge, the fatness of a roll, the damage a hit does, and the ability to restore energy, Black Myth is much more basic. Items you get usually have clear bonuses to stats. As you've expected, you have your health, mana, stamina, attacks, defense, stamina recovery, critical chance and damage, damage bonus, and damage reduction, as well as resistances to the 4 banes, which are chilling, burning, poison, and shock. Equipping yourself with not only the upgradable staff as well as 2 trinket spots and a helmet, chest, feet, and hands allow for you to go out and take on more and more advanced enemies as you find new items. Also, while you're exploring, you gather sparks that can be spent on a large number of skills, unlocking combos and staff stances, and they have 6 total categories, most of those having at least 2 or more trees nested in them. Foundation, staff stances, mysticism, alteration, strand, and transformations. For example, in the foundation skills category, you have stamina, martial arts, survival skills, durability, and movement. While the martial arts skills make up new combos, as well as mixed and new unlocked moves, for example, an area of attack bash or reducing the stamina needed for a staff spin, where survival is all about shirking off environmental effects like poison or raising up the damage that you do for massive critical hits. Then you have the staff stances themselves. These are things like smash, pillar, and thrust, as well as another more parallel tree that augments all the combos regardless of the stance. Each one offers something a little bit different. You're probably going to want to choose one and then upgrade that one a little bit more than the others, but it'll be up to you. Smash stance isn't just the power attacks you would expect, but also the ability to sprint and charge. Then you have pillar stance, which of course lets you climb up on top of the staff and look down and cackle like a damned fool. And then thrust stance is about keeping enemies just a bit away from you by either fast hits or quick retreats, and then turning those into attacks all their own. When it comes to the spells under mysticism, you have things like Immobilize, which itself has 2 different trees. Buy one and it lets you do more damage to frozen enemies. Another lets you do a ton of damage if you hit an enemy, then freeze them again. Also, one thing to remember, all of those may have multiple levels apiece. Each costs a minimum of 1 spark, if not more. For example, main health and stamina have 6 levels just for that one thing, which means you can fall victim to spreading your points too wide and not feeling as big of a bump as you expect. Luckily, you can respec at any time. So while the game eschews the typical stats making multi-layered changes down through the characters, the abilities, our skills, and all of the transformations and spells you have come together. But there's another thing that I really like in this game, and that's armor. Armor unlocks are usually tied to defeating some particular enemies, but the sets are unique. You may have one set that increases damage the more you sprint, and it stacks. And if you have the entire set, the first hit on an enemy is hugely buffed. Or a water set, which reduces stamina use all the time, but if you fight in water, it massively reduces it. And many more, meaning you might enter a battle and start instantly looking for every puddle of water you can stomp around in, changing the entire way you might play an engagement or a boss, or anything. But as you get all the different armor sets, you might think to yourself, oh, you know what? This boss back 4 levels ago was in water. I'm going to go back and try to take him out. Most armors give you a small base bonus all the time, meaning a new set is most likely better in pure numerical value than the other. No matter how you go about it, you're going to be exploring this world, and Black Myth isn't an open world game. It's not even close. In fact, the open areas are much more closed off than you expect, with just a couple paths all inevitably leading to one of the sub-bosses or some sweet loot at the starting. But then the further you get in, the areas open up more and more, just in time with you getting more skills and some experience under your belt, until you're traipsing across the canyon and have 4 or 5 different ways to go. Just be aware that in Black Myth, everything pretty much ends somewhere. So if you do go off the beaten path, either it'll have a shortcut back after a while or some kind of item there. It's not Far Cry, for Christ's sakes. It requires you pay attention. Huge grasslands, ruined castles, and later complexes consistently aim to make you pay attention to a particular spot, not just a path marker, but to mentally mark where you are, where you've decided to go off the beaten path and find a better vantage point to identify new enemies, or hold some entirely optional section for you if you go there. People pretend that games with no minimap are as bad as someone removing the child's safety caps on medication in all the drugstores. It's just refreshing to me to play something that feels different, but coming together as its own thing. I was never once lost. I can see some people having that issue, but for me, honestly, really enjoyable. However, the game takes 2 steps forward and maybe 1 step, if not 1.5 steps back. The game has a huge number of invisible walls, and they aren't always where you expect them to be, so you can be tearing down a small ravine and see what looks like a place to climb. In fact, it looks like a great deal of spots after that, and you can't go there, just invisible walls. It's a noticeable downer, and while it doesn't happen nearly everywhere, it cracks up the style of the game more than I would like and makes it feel more disjointed than it should. Technical issues. I had a single crash in 50 hours. I did have 2 cutscenes where the audio was not timed at all with the action, and sadly, it was the first major cutscene of the game, as well as some issues with subtitles. A bad guy threatening you isn't as badass when he looks like old Kung Fu Theater Sunday morning matinee videos with poorly timed voice and lip syncing. At 45 hours, I'm at the end, but then I just ended up turning around and went back to explore and take out a couple bosses that I knew where they were, and I was identifying them as people that I wanted to fight. I could see someone trying to skip through everything, and I look forward to seeing how fast someone can play through it, but that's a different style of gameplay than what I use. Fun factor. It is an absolute blast, but some things to understand. The game is loose. That's just the nature of the combat, which means collision detection and situational damage can occur that looks somewhat wrong. The loose combat works better with some boss battles, but falls to its own weaknesses in others. Enemies here have status effects or ones with a huge number of special effects that can make it a little bit more prone to you not understanding exactly how you got hit sometimes. But despite that, despite getting mainlined by a boss like it was a new type of monkey amphetamine they needed to swallow, despite bouncing off enemy ads, sentient legged boulder things that leapt into the air in perfect time with the music and movements, I never once got mad. Frustrated at times that a boss pulled out a move if I hadn't seen, or that a group of enemies caught me right on the edge of a ravine and I couldn't get away because of an invisible wall. I kept going, back and back and back again. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, sale, deep sale, or never touch a rating system. At the best of times, Wukong is pure ballistic synergy, a ballet of spells and transformation and presentation, something that finally feels different enough on its own that saying it's like this game or that other game just shows how distilled and absolutely brain dead discussing games can be. At other times, it's less fun. That's it, just less fun. Unless you have a top-of-the-line system or are okay with a lower resolution and a lot of fiddling for some kind of graphics setting, this might be something you want to hold off on. If you're okay with that, then it's an absolute delight to play. I thought it was worth it, but this is one of those titles that, because of the tech issues and the power required, you really should be aware of Steam's return policy if you need to use it. So that's it for me. Subscribe to the channel if you want no more BS, no weird embargo coverage. Also subscribe to the podcast channel. We're going to dive into Black Myth more this Friday. Peace out. Make sure to comment. We'll try to give away some codes.